in higher education are confronted with tend to be cases where they're defending academic freedom. Do you really think that academic freedom is something that academics aren't aware of? Is
no, unions are, at least in the context of Malaysia and many countries in Southeast Asia, even if you look at Singapore, unions are aware of the need for academic freedom, right? But in terms of priorities, I would argue, academics themselves,
they take it for granted.
They don't see academic freedom as necessarily important.
Huh. Okay. Well,
that's my.
All right. Well,
and there is a need to educate them about the importance of academic freedom, the links between academic freedom and excellence, for example, integrity, and so on and so forth, right?
Okay.
Okay. So
All
anyway.
Right. Well, let's save some of that for the discussion with the group, though, if that's okay. And I appreciate the analysis, very interesting analysis. But I want to bring Fernando Leon into the conversation as well. Now you've sort of heard from the different teacher representatives, union representatives around the world, what's at stake for the profession and what it's going to take to promote truly equitable and sustainable sort of higher education systems. And I want to come first back to the issue of funding. So, because it really impacts many, and we were talking about, I think it was Andreas that raised the point about universities and professors having to go out and look for funding themselves to maintain their research. But I also know university professors also have to go out and look for funding themselves as a big part of these days of their job. But I was wondering, in the current situation, from your perspective, when it comes to funding in higher education, particularly at this stage of the pandemic, and sort of what are the implications for universities as employers in this coming future, particularly around funding?
Yep. First of all, the 7 was based not on conditions. It was based on progress relative to the goals, right? And I think there is progress. So anyway, clarified that. Interestingly enough, we had a conversation on financing yesterday, another panel. And what I was commenting was that it's contextual. It's contextual. So there are many countries where, despite the pandemic, investment has increased. There are many others where it has gone worse in South. So I think that as higher education institutions and as leaders, what we need to do is, first of all, make the case that higher education is a priority and that such priorities should be reflected in terms of the investment and funding that a country is dedicating to education institutions. Of course, first and foremost, public. First and foremost. There are some countries where there is a mix of overwhelmingly public with some private. And here, Jamil Salmi says, well, if the country really needs it, we should be talking about quality, not about distinction. And therefore, whatever makes sense in terms of investing for a quality education, governments should support. So one argument is we should make the case and create awareness so that there is an improved sense of funding overall, because it's uneven, number one. Number two, as educational institutions, we also need to play a more active role. On the one hand, as leaders, and I'm talking here about AAUP and as leaders, we need to make sure that we're able to argue and defend the financial and operational sustainability of carrying out a specific mission, not predominance in terms of research. There are many universities. Of course, the elite universities are focused on research, but thousands and thousands of universities, although they want to carry out 3 roles, the first one is teaching. So, you have to make sure that you do achieve the conditions to carry out excellence in teaching. And that as research comes into play, I think that as educational institutions, we also need to make sure that we are participating, regardless of whose role it is. Leadership, professors, a joint collaboration between administration and the faculty to find ways of generating additional resources. One is, of course, to focus on what is called institutional advancement or fundraising. Fundraising, strictly speaking, is not something that you ask the faculty to do. is for the institution to go out and seek with society and with business. It is part of the formula that I think will offset that funding challenge that we have. On the other hand, to the extent that universities are more active with business and industry, involved in applied research, problem-solving projects, that can also generate some funding. So that's one strand. The other, of course, is what do you do internally? And I think that there, it varies from country to country, it varies from institution to institution, but I think that the pandemic has heightened our awareness of certain aspects that we had and certain aspects that we are now facing. And as leaders, we need to ask the questions. I don't have the solutions, but I have the questions that we have to go through so that those conditions that you're talking about create a greater stability. Another thing for starters. The condition in Mexico, in most institutions, and in my institution, mine is private, not-for-profit, okay? And so if you're hired until something odd happens that you won't have a job. So job security is not an issue. It's more about how much you move up, and that's where the associated, but job security is not an issue. In terms of the pandemic, we were able to stabilize enrollment. We did not lose enrollment, therefore our finances did not suffer. Guess what? Nobody was let go. Nobody, absolutely zero. But that depends on how you as a leader in an institution and with your governing board are able to put and highlight the importance of your resources, starting with academics, so that you can provide continuity to the institution. That's very important. But that said, then, let me go back to some of the things that have been on the horizon. Rozowski, Gavasi, and Guy recently pointed out that institutions have been carrying out for years adjustments, but adjustments on the periphery, and not really analyzing what it is that universities need to adjust. So you have a sense of mission creep. Mission creep means you analyze what you're doing, you determine what you need, and you just add more resources. You don't necessarily eliminate things that maybe are dysfunctional or are not really appropriate at the institutions. This does not necessarily mean academic programs. It can mean beginning with administrative functions. So we need to continuously do that, because that leads then to resources that are freed up that you then can invest into other important roles. Now, the reflections. Here are the dilemmas. How will we work, how will we carry across the professoriate if now the case is for hybrid and online education? It's true, overwhelmingly, the professoriate were accustomed to face-to-face. It is inevitable that we're going to have to move in that direction. How should we do this? On the one hand, what do you do in terms of the course load? On the other hand, what do you do in terms of capacity building? It was clear that during the pandemic, most professoriates were not familiar with technology. They were not equipped. And while we all moved and we presented a solution to society, it was emergency remote education. It was not online education. It was not hybrid. And so if we're going to move in that direction, we need to look at what it will take for at least a portion of the faculty to acquire the necessary skills and resources so that they can be successful there. Another thing also is that we're accustomed to face-to-face. If we're going to move to hybrid and online, then does everybody have to be there on campus? Do they all have to be from the same city? And this brings to bearing something that I would call, and maybe it's another argument, the borderless professor. Borderless professor meaning that if you want to internationalize or regionalize a university, you can rely on at least a portion of the professors connecting from elsewhere so that you can enrich, the teaching and learning that goes on with students. So in any case, must the professoriate continue to do everything as was in the past? or do we need to move in the direction of unbundling? We talk about the professoriate being overloaded. Well, let's ask the question, are all of the things that we've asked professors to do things that professors need to keep on doing? There had been a call before the pandemic of an unbundling process, whereby you have instructional designers, you have, technologists, you have other auxiliary and support mechanisms that could make and lighten the load of professors on a go-forward basis. Ownership will certainly not suffer if some of the things that professors had to do before are now carried out by other support mechanisms. And moving on, what happens to recruitment, broadening not only to academics, what happens to recruitment now that social media is strong and increasingly popular form of recruitment? Do they have to be full-time, face-to-face? There's a whole question of how it is that is going to move about. What about fundraising, as I mentioned? You have fundraising moving to record levels at many institutions, despite the pandemic and despite not being face-to-face. So I think that these are some of the questions that as leaders of institutions we will be facing, where we need to discuss this, redefine the role of the professoriate and of others, so that then we can create the conditions. I won't get into that because that's the next segment. The conditions then that will allow them to do not a decent, an excellent and a quality role as they carry out their respective functions, whether it's teaching, whether it's research, whether it's outreach.
You gave us a lot to think about. I was thinking just before I go to the next bit, and I want to come back on some of these digital aspects. We heard yesterday about in terms of the internationalization model. Mm-hmm. So you were talking about international professors that could be brought in, but we heard from Australia, where it had a huge number of international students, that once the pandemic hit, their funding model collapsed on them, and they had to let go of a huge number of faculty and across Australia. And then when they were talking to the students, who then were connecting online, internationally, across time zones from their parents' basements, not the best experience, right? Now you can say that's emergency education, that's not purposeful online education. But it does seem that there is a role for the university, and obviously for faculty, to be anchored in communities. And there is a bit of a trade-off if you envision something where you have part-time professors coming in from around the world, maybe to enhance potentially, but in terms of staffing those universities and working. I see a real, challenge there that what students and professors experienced during the pandemic. I mean, there's this part of me that wonders if there's some cautionary tales inside of there, no?
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's going to extremes, and I'm not suggesting we go to extremes. The full-time professoriate should exist, but there's a margin for the talent that many universities, in particular in developing countries, do not have, and they will not have. And therefore, a portion of the curriculum could be taught and could be enriched by international professors. So I'm not arguing that we should have only those who are working on 0 hours contracts, having to find work different places. Yes.
The expectations that they'll always be available to the students. What's the responsibility of the employer around the well-being?
Again, as a leader of an institution, institutions begin to promote a conversation on and pathways to career progression for the professor within the institution. In the process, we should not omit consideration of aspects that have been addressed, that have not been addressed, or perhaps have not been addressed enough, embedded into the university culture. We talk about student development and student success. We need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about diversity. We need to talk about inclusion. We need to talk about gender equality. All of these are things that we need to begin to address so that we find a more stable, committed, dedicated faculty who can do their jobs. If we're not addressing this, then we're not providing the environment.
Would you agree, though, that these are structural issues?
Yes, yeah.
They're not like add-ons? That these,
No.
when you say
These are
we, you mean
structural.
through
No.
collegial negotiating,
But
bargaining with the-
until we begin to address the administration and the leadership of the importance of this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, that was enough from me. And
Sorry.
And I wanted to give Emilia just a chance because she had another question, and I don't know if you have just about digitalization. Then I'm going to come and open it up to the floor because we were just, Fernanda, we were just talking about well-being. We're talking about the work-life balance. During COVID, that seemed all out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Emilia has done a lot of research on looking at the different types of platforms, looking at issues around privacy and surveillance, the ways in which I think some types of technology was imposed versus when the professional autonomy of academics was able to choose what it wanted to do and kind of come together collegially and collectively. I've heard you speak on this topic before, some of the risks and challenges. ¿Me está siguiendo? Around digitalization. And I was just wondering just briefly before, and then we can just open it up because I didn't give you a chance to do that. Given everything that we've just talked about, what do you think are the sort of trade-offs around going forward with some aspects of digitalization in higher education that are here to stay, and what might be some of the things that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that we have regulations around going forward?
We were talking yesterday a lot about the impact of digitalization and the emergency remote teaching and pandemic. So I just will point some notes. What we are worried about. We are making some research about the tendencies in Latin America and Caribbean countries and university systems, and we noted that there were some tendencies some trends that were deepened by the pandemic situation, and one main trend is the privatization and marketization in higher education systems. Not only the expansion of the private system, but also the private institutions, but also the presence, the strong presence of marketization trends in the public systems. And one of the ways through which this trend is deepening in higher education public systems is the incorporation of some technologies that came to help us in the emergency, but
but they came with fine print, you say?
Yeah.
There's fine print, no la letra chica.
No.
No.
Yes, because these technologies frequently not adequate for the pedagogical objectives, but also are technologies provided by commercial corporations that not only have used this situation, this exceptional situation, to introduce themselves and their products in the educational world, and particularly in higher education institutions, but also to legitimate themselves as speakers, interlocutors in the decision making about public policies. And now we have the presence of these corporations very
and the public
very
good they might be more interested in profit making than in the public's what's best for democracy or for the public good or Or societies,
of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
They are commercial corporations.
Imagine
but
that.
also the use of these technologies has implied a loss of autonomy for teachers and researchers, the loss of the control of the pedagogic process, and a level of exposition, a loss of privacy, and the loss of control of the information that is circulating.
I mean, I've heard the example of some professors who have taped themselves to give, only to find out later that the rights to that video are not theirs, that they belong now to not even the university, but maybe to the online platform, and that they could be automated and used, connected with an algorithm that puts them out there. And their course that they were teaching now it is sort of been automated in a way, which is almost unbelievable to think about. But there's some real issues that we have there. You have one more point, and then I'm just going to go to the audience.
Yes, just to say that we need to think that we should produce the technologies that we need. We know what we need. We know the dangers or the risks that implies that some other technology, but we are part of the institutions that have the responsibility to produce the knowledge and the technology that we need, and that technology should be produced with the participation of teachers, researchers, and students, and taking in account a reflection about our experience during the pandemic. We need to know what we have learned during the pandemic.
Okay, that's a good point. Real quick, go ahead if you wanted to comment on it.
I was just going to add that it is very important, therefore, for any institution that wants to go into that beyond just emergency remote education, to go through that reflection process. Do I have the internal capacity? Because the ideal is it should be through internal capacity. If you don't, then you need to be very aware of the fine print and what you're giving up as you move forward. So I think, there have been many situations where they have taken advantage of that. Bad for the university. The university should have looked at that and determined what it could have done.
So could we, for the roadmap then, maybe is there something around the design of those types of platforms with the profession, with the workforce, in a co-designed model, some sort of agreement or protocol that could be put together to ensure that it's actually fit for purpose and actually useful. Maybe, but I don't have all the answers. You said you have questions, all the questions, not the answers. I don't have any of the answers. I just have lots of questions, but you all have had a lot. Thank you very much. So let's come to the floor here, the audience, to ask your questions. If I ask you just please raise your hand and introduce yourself first, and then who would like to direct the question. Yes, sir, please. Oh, here comes the microphone, Pascal.
I am an associate professor of higher education management in Finland. I'm also here on invitation as the president of the Diaspora Academic Network for Africa. We are taking advantage of the digital revolution to get African academics, diaspora academics, to teach back, supplement, internationalize education in Africa. So I would be talking like a specialist of higher education management, a teacher of higher education management. I think this is one of the best topics so far. I thank those who brought this topic. I would like to say there is the need for a new contract between higher education and the states within the current circumstance in which we find ourselves. Secondly, one of the problems, some of the solutions to the issues that are raised here are in higher education, but the problem is the ivory tower nature of higher education. One institution is doing very good thing, and the next door institution doesn't know. So I think also it's the place of UNESCO, for instance, to break that divide between institutions. I'm saying this because I was interested when our colleague from, Malaysia was talking. There is a book publication around 2005, The Academic Profession, led by Ulrich Tyler. He was my teacher. That's a starting point, because when you go into it, some of these issues that have been raised are there. They resemble each other. I was interested because there are solutions to some of the issues our colleagues from Malaysia brought. I wanted to find out from him, academics, civil servants in Malaysia. This is where some of the problems are coming. Look at the cases such as in Finland. There need to be new negotiations with the state to give autonomy. It's not also autonomy to be, because he who pays is it piper dictates the tune? Yeah. Most of this autonomy is given so that institutions should also generate money. When academics are civil servants, it also ties the hands of vice chancellors, for instance. They cannot easily hire, compensate excellence, or fire misconduct of teachers. So it will be important to look at it from the perspective of a renegotiation with the state. And then I was constantly thinking about the American model, where the academic core is different from the administrative core. All over the world now it is mixed. And also I think also about Francophone Africa, for instance, where many academics are civil servants. Rectors in most Francophone African universities are still appointed by presidential decree. So, the institutions are completely tied. They are politicized. You can no academic freedom. But it's not only in developing countries, also the academic profession is really in serious crisis. I would like to talk about Finland, for instance. We must also look at it from the induction point, the entry point. Finland was producing 500 doctorates about 10, 15 years ago. It now produces 2,000. Okay, now I just attended a panel in Finland. They have resolved into this short contracts issue, which is really, we told them like, this is really dirty academic practice, but they are explaining, okay, and then the foreigners say, no, but we end up being those with short contracts. Oh, by the time you design something in a project, they say, oh, your contract has ended, and then they continue your project with somebody else. So it's really, I would like to end by saying these things were being talked of in 2005 at 2022. This is real time to look at issues of the academic profession. I almost forgot something we are trying to do, the gender side of it, for instance. Mm-hmm. We are trying to do, we're just doing a study about maternity leaves regimes between different countries. Okay, where we see that professors end up having less children, those who go through, the female academics who go through the academic career, end up, some of them get married so late, or they end up with 1 or 2 children against their desire to have 5. Thank you for allowing me.
Thank you. I wasn't sure there was a question, and I think it was a comment. A lot of points in there to unpack, though, around renegotiating. I think obviously the issue of institutional autonomy is a huge one. And the fact, though, that doesn't mean that institutions don't have to abide by labor laws or labor codes for the workforce is a pretty important piece there. I don't know about, you said the American model. Irene, I don't know if you agree that there is an American, we have the head of the American University professors here. I don't know if you, she might have a few comments, but let's go to Irene if we would. And then we can come back for some.
Thank you. I'm Irene Mulvey. I'm a professor of mathematics and also the president of the American Association of University Professors. But I get paid to be a professor of mathematics. The other is an elected leadership role. But I had a couple of comments. I think I only know the American model, so I'm not sure how I can compare and contrast it. But in the comments, I was very concerned to hear the talk of, you know, unbundling and maybe to lighten the load of full professors. You know, we may have instructional designers and so on, because I think in the universities I know, the load is heavy because we have fewer full-time faculty, and so those that are left have more to do. And, you know, part-time faculty are, I don't even want to get off down the rabbit hole of part-time faculty and the contingency problem and the forcing these scholars into a gig economy. It concerns me because the way I think about faculty is, you know, this is a profession. We go into this because it's a profession, and we should be treated like a profession, like professionals. So, I mean, any kind of, you know, this redefining the role in the institutions I know would have to be done through, you know, collegial governance. And I'm also concerned to hear that, you know, I know fundraising is part of the formula, but the experiences I've seen with, you know, when institutions are working with business and industry and wealthy donors, those people want influence on, I mean, we had this situation that Nicole Hannah-Jones was, you know, not given tenure at the University of North Carolina because the donor for whom the journalism school was named after didn't like her work on the 1619 project and telling a truthful history of racism in America. So my concern about, you know, fundraising being part of the problem and relying on that is, you know, those people, you know, he who pays the piper picks the tune, and those people are liable to want influence, which is a direct threat to academic freedom in our institutions. But my real comment, the real thing I wanted to say is that I agree this has been the best topic that I've attended so far, and I'm really surprised that worker rights, worker issues isn't in the roadmap. And I'm really glad to see this group getting it into the roadmap, because the panels I've been at are that, you know, where they're talking about a right to higher education. I really support that, the right to a higher education, public education in service of democracy, the right to higher education to anyone willing to, you know, accessible and affordable to anyone willing to do the work. But I think what's been missing, and what I really think this panel will get into the roadmap, is that all of those promises to students, requires that we guarantee those students well-supported teachers. You can't keep those promises without well-supported teachers. So I don't know if I had a question either. I had a bunch of comments, and if you'd like to respond, that would be great. I mean, if you think, you know, I'll turn it over back to Dave.
No, good, very good, Irene. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. I heard some applause actually back there. That's the first applause. I kind of wanted, because we're online, and then I'm going to ask each one of you to think about one key message that you want to convey about the future of the workforce in higher education that should be addressed in the roadmap. So if you want to already start thinking about what that might be.
So good afternoon. I'm Damir Solaga. I'm from Czech Student Union, and I just wanted to mention when we were speaking about challenges such as equality, work-life balance, and all the things we need to focus. I like to also stress that we should focus as well on PhD students and the quality of PhD programs and the skills development of those students, because they are going to be one day future teachers, future researchers, future academic staff. So we need to focus on them as well.
So I'm going to come back to the panel, and this is sort of just to close us out and to kind of bring some focus and some major takeaways from this panel, okay? So I'll repeat what I'm going to ask each one of them. Based on the conversation today and yesterday, if you were here yesterday, what was one key message that you would like to convey about the future of the workforce in higher education? And it's going to be, it's hard to pick one, I know, because there are so many messages. But we need to be able to convey, and back to UNESCO for the sort of the rapporteur, that should be addressed in the roadmap. What would it be? I'm going to start with you, Andreas.
Thank you. A challenge not to answer all these questions and to comment all these contributions. Thank you for this. I will thinking about afterwards. But I think main message could be that quality teaching, quality research, and quality work, good working conditions, reliable career paths, should be two sides of one medal. Because I think it's important for us as state unions to stress that, of course, it's our job to represent our members in the best way and to say they need good working conditions. But in order to persuade governments and the public opinion as well, it's necessary to stress this relationship. And this should be a message of the outcome of this conference. And in order to get good working conditions as a prerequisite of quality teaching and research, we should have permanent jobs for permanent tasks. We have a lot of permanent tasks in teaching and research, apart from qualification like PhD candidates do for as well. And for all these permanent tasks, we need permanent jobs in order and quality of academic work.
Great, thank you very much. Good point. Jamile.
Just one.
I know for you that would be, for Argentina, that's like, for Argentina, it's very difficult.
Yes.
One usually means 100, right? So one, but see if you can, to the best of your ability.
Okay.
I'll understand.
Okay.
And I also want to thank Jamile for really speaking in English. You know, I sometimes speak in Spanish, but and we will bring this up with the organizers that we weren't able to have interpretation. So thank you again. And thank you, Fernando, for speaking in English too.
Yeah, okay. I want to share with you that in 2008 and in 2018, the Regional Conference of Higher Education in Latin America defined that higher education is a universal human right, a social public good, and that is a responsibility of the states to support higher education. And I think it's important to stress that we just can't guarantee this right to higher education with the support of the state through the public systems, because the public system is the only one that can be ¿qué le podemos exigir? That we can, just to the public, we can demand to represent the common good, the common interest. So we have, as workers, also the political responsibility to be part of the movement for the democratization of our states and for the engagement of our states to support public higher education, public education and public higher education. And I think that we should put some other thing at stake, which is the problem of the financial capacity of the states to support public education. If the state some states seems not to have or don't have the financial capacity to support public education, we should ask why is that, and we should debate the mechanisms to guarantee that capacity through the tax reform at national level, but also at the global level, because we don't have inequalities because of nature. We have inequalities. That means that in some places there is too much poverty. In some places there is too much wealthy.
Thank you. Ram?
Yeah, I think I'd like to expand, or really put what Jamila says in a kind of the context. Essentially, my one word would be structures. Yeah, that there is. If you hear about what was said about negotiations with governments and so on and so forth, my question is, what if governments don't want to negotiate? That's been our problem in the context of our country. We've had to bring them to court. And when you bring them to court, those are expensive sort of activities that you have to do. So I think basically the one key thing I think we have to take away is that we have to look at structures, because over the past, since 2009, right, the last, and the questions that have been raised now, it's evident that there are a lot of questions. But the solutions should have been forthcoming, I feel, to some of them over the last 15 years, or 13 years. But evidently, with all the problems that are continuing now and the increasing nature of those problems, not only in the context of third world countries or developing countries, but also in advanced capitalist states, I think we need to examine the structures that are there, the political economic structures, the role of governments, the role of the state, and also the role of the economy, the economic system that's there. I think these wider factors are things that affect the other parts, the other problems that are persistent. Yeah. So that's my take.
Thank you. And finally.
Okay, I'll try to capture it in one sentence. Okay. High quality education requires talented and dedicated professionals that need to be nurtured, supported, and developed in an integral and coordinated manner, whether this refers to government and universities or within the universities, the professoriate and administration.
Succinct. Great. Thank you very much. And you got some applause there too. Great. I want to ask all of you to please join me in thanking what I think was the panelists who did a fantastic job on a very important and salient topic. So thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming and wish you all the best in the rest of your time here at the World Higher Education Conference. Thank you.